The White Sox are going to need some pitchers to step up to solve their pitching crisis. The only problem is they're not even on the 26-man roster.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter. On today's show, I'll get to this week's Way Back Wednesday segment, as let's revisit the seasons that made us fall in love with the White Sox. That comes after discussing just how much manager Will Venable should rely on matchups instead of just going with context or his gut. But first, let's discuss the White Sox likely needing some pitchers to step up who are not even on the 26-man roster, and that is where the help is coming from, according to manager Will Venable. I mean, the pitching is in crisis right now outside of Sean Burke and Anthony Kay, at least when it comes to the starting rotation. And that is why you can still be frustrated with the lack of getting another starter at the trade deadline, because this club needs innings in the worst way, as the bullpen is being tasked, and we still got a few more weeks to go in this season. Now, bullpenning can work here and there, and it's obviously going to probably have to be an option in the postseason. However, you don't want to be bullpenning through a stretch run. It's not what should carry you through the rest of the season when you're in a division race or when you're facing your rival across town who is a pretty darn good team, and you would like to keep showing that you can beat good teams. And that is why someone is going to have to step up whenever they get recalled. Because as you keep seeing in this series against the Cubs, you can only ask this bullpen to do so much. Although it's a little concerning when the pitching director admits the pitching development is way behind. Now, obviously the easiest solution for someone to just step up is Davis Martin when he returns from his 15 days off. I mean, recovering from a blister that'll put him on the 15-day IL. And if he could just use this rest period to recharge, tinker with some stuff, and get back to at least being a decent pitcher, an innings eater, a guy that can give you 6 innings, no less than 4 runs or less. Not a guy that puts you in a 4-0 hole. But that's still one arm. I mean, Erick Fedde and Jose Urquidy are not guys you really want to be throwing more than 5 innings. I mean, tip of the cap to Fedde for what he did last night. Gave you a really quality amount of innings, but we've seen he's a guy that, you feel comfortable facing the lineup the first time through, maybe a little bit of the second, but he's not a guy that can get through the lineup 3 times. Same with Urquidy. He's just a Band-Aid. I don't even know if he's a Band-Aid. He's like the gauze, the little alcohol wipe you put on before you put the Band-Aid. But if Martin's time off doesn't work, then other options are going to have to be considered. I mean, other options might have to be considered right now, because you can't keep relying on Trevor Richards to basically pitch every day. I mean, that arm is eventually going to fall off, and you're starting to see sometimes. I mean, he made some decent pitches last night, but he didn't make enough pitches to get Alex Bregman out. So that means somebody's got to answer the call. Like, please, Shane Smith or Drew Thorpe or David Sandlin or Noah Schultz, answer the call. Step up. One of you has to be able to provide some innings of at least 5, heck, maybe 6, and no more than allowing 4 runs down the stretch. Although they keep talking about maybe bringing these guys up and nothing ever happens. But those are your options per 104.3 The Score and marquee baseball insider Bruce Levine, and the guy that his tweet may have inspired the Cubs to go on this run. He tweeted out that those are going to be your options. At MLB Bruce Levine, White Sox manager Will Venable says he expects a majority of help for his pitching staff will come from the minors. Only waiver claims on released players are the other options. Noah Schultz, Shane Smith, Drew Thorpe, and David Sandlin are options. Martin on IL as well. Although Smith continues to show his regression is going to be hard to overcome as he lasted just 2 innings yesterday in AAA Charlotte. Thorpe continues to apparently need rehab assignments, so who knows when the team is going to feel comfortable that his arm is ready to go after coming off of Tommy John surgery. And while he's been crisp in his rehab assignments, shaking off the rust of missing 2 full years does come with some risks. David Sandlin and Noah Schultz obviously have shown potential, but they got to work on their command, obviously. They've also shown the potential to get lit up like a Christmas tree. And Schultz has to alter some of his mechanics as discussed on previous episodes. And it's never good to read that your pitching director admits the pitching development is behind the hitting. Because James Fegan, who is now the White Sox beat writer for the Chicago Sun-Times, he wrote about the team's pitching development issues that have popped up this season. Some of the first pieces that he's written for the Sun-Times. And he spoke with pitching director Brian Bannister. And this is the snippet I want to share that gives me a gulp. This is what he writes. It's a problem for the Sox to have a surprise contention year accelerating their major league pitching needs. But the fact that none of their valued prospects has stepped forward to seize a rotation spot with opening day starter Shane Smith and former mainstay Jonathan Cannon lingering in AAA is a reason to look inward. Quote, "We're not where I want us to be," senior pitching advisor Brian Bannister said. "I truly believe in the next couple of years we're going to be a top 5 pitching development organization, but we're not there yet." Not everything related to the Sox pitching should be reflexively attributed to Bannister. He learned of the August 1st trade for starter Luis Castillo via social media like most everyone else. Injuries have also played a clear role in the shortfalls in starting pitching. Sandlin's season was delayed by a month because of his soreness in his back and elbow. Smith and McDougal moved to bullpen roles for the rest of the 2026 season because of a shoulder impingement and a flexor strain, respectively. Schultz's struggle with another bout of tendonitis in his right knee have fueled an internal theory that the delivery mechanics that make him most effective and the ones that take stress off his lead leg, are 2 different things. And then I'm going to just skip ahead. This is where I get concerned. In the last 2 years, the Sox have installed Hawkeye motion tracking technology at their minor league affiliates and incorporated biomechanical information like never before. Bannister thinks their starter shortage reflects the fickle nature of pitching development and an organization with ways to go. Quote, "It's still happening right at this moment. Massive overhauls behind the scene in what our research and development capabilities are and the tools that we can provide to both myself and the coaches," he said. We haven't even gotten to the point where we're actively employing the biomechanics, the Hawkeye data. We've added it to 4 levels, but we don't actively have access to that data on a regular basis the way that I did at previous orgs," end quote. That is unacceptable for an organization, especially where the owner does not pay for pitching. At the very least, pay for pitching development. Because even if you have that little added cost, most of those arms don't start to earn big bucks. So make sure the data is available on a regular basis. Up the subscription, Jerry. And while there are mitigating factors that Fegan pointed out, I mean, you do see how things like the regression of a former top 10 prospect like Christian Opper has really affected actually reinforcements as well. I mean, he could have been fast-tracked had his development not regressed to at least help out the bullpen. But right now, this club either needs a staycation for Davis Martin to bounce back, or I would say maybe Drew Thorpe finally getting back on a big league mound and unleashing that devastating changeup with hopefully a fastball that hits 93 that can maybe solve this pitching crisis. Otherwise, it's hard to have faith in Shane Smith when he just can't get on track. And Schultz, I mean, they're also asking him to throw more of his north-south stuff, where he's obviously comfortable throwing more east-west. So that could take some time for him to feel comfortable throwing an effective curveball. Sandlin, ups and downs. And I would deal with it and be more tolerable of it if this was 2018, but you just can't deal with his command issues. So somebody needs to step up. Somebody needs to come out of nowhere, and it's just, it's getting nervous. Well, Will Venable continues to play the matchups, and that is causing some frustration with the young manager. Let's discuss next. Make baseball season more this year. On Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, you can trade on every single game. and that means you could trade on every Chicago game. Chicago is trading at a 47% probability to beat Atlanta tomorrow, meaning a $100 trade pays out $213.34 if the Southsiders win. You could also trade on things like the Pale Hose winning the division. That's trading at a 64% probability, meaning a $100 trade pays out $155.87. Winning the whole thing, that's trading at a 4% chance. So if that dream becomes a reality, a $100 trade would pay out $2,754.70. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. You could trade on things like who's going to be the next draft pick. You could trade on, again, outcomes of the game. You could just trade it more on Kalshi. Download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi. Kalshi. Trade on anything. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Kalshi products are not available in all jurisdictions. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. This is now my third season podcast here. I've been covering the team well before that. I've also covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And may you be loved like Will Venable loves playing matchups. A gut-feeling manager, he is not. Okay? And that is leading to some frustration with the manager. And I discussed it on yesterday's show, especially that most of his pregame press conference yesterday was addressing why he decided to pitch to Pete Crow Armstrong, who then ends up hitting a walk-off home run off of Hagen Smith. And again, I understand the point of view of why not see what Hagen can do. But Hagen's only pitched 4 2/3 innings in the majors. PCA is playing, he's playing a whole different level of baseball right now. I mean, I don't even think Randy Johnson could have gotten him out in that situation, okay? Chris Sale that's a tall ask. I mean, PCA, he's got an F4 over 8, guys, okay? That's how elite he has been. And I hated the response Will had after the game yesterday, or 2 nights before. Now, in the pregame press conference, I think it was a little bit more measured. And hey, he did walk PCA this time in the 9th after realizing, hey, his run would only count if there's a walk-off home run. Because that was the other thing. He kept talking about, I got to, the matchup with Seiya, and we were gonna walk Seiya. And all this stuff where it's like, that run wouldn't have mattered unless it's a walk-off. You're tied. You just don't want that one run to score, like what happened last night. But he did decide to go with Richards last night to pitch in the 9th because, to be fair, Mother Nature wrecked everything by raining just as Grant Taylor was supposed to pitch in the 8th. So you didn't have Taylor available. And I get that there's been scorn for Venable not embracing traditional bullpen roles because he's always playing the leverage situation. And one could argue, like Recap White Sox podcast host Ryan McGuffey, formerly of CHSN Chicago, he tweeted, right, as the 9th inning is going, man, and that's at Ryan McGuffey, man, hate the matchup stuff here. Richard gives you a great inning, and Newcomb is one of your best relievers and warm. And then you give Richards another inning, and this game is up for grabs, and it turned out to be a loss. Now, Will obviously had Newcomb warmed up, but he was playing for the potential of if the Sox had the lead. If they could score a run in the 9th inning, Newcomb would go for the save. If it's tied, he was basically praying Richards can get 3 outs and get this to extras. And he almost did, but again, almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, as the old cliche says. And I get that it can drive you nuts because it's also, to me, starting to come across as maybe he is trying to be the smartest guy in the room. Or he's just too focused on managing the game on paper and not the game in front of him. However, I'm going to go back to James Fegan, his recent work at the Chicago Sun-Times. He did point out sometimes, some of the matchups works, like, his penchant, Venable's penchant for pitch hitting a lot, that works actually. This is the snippet I want to share. Despite the Sox beating low preseason expectations to lead their division in August, Venable's adherence to platoon matchups over gut feeling decision has been a flashpoint. Ironically, Venable playing the matchups also resulted in the Sox high point Monday. Designated hitter Randall Grichuk's 3-run homer in the fourth had accounted for all of their scoring entering the eighth. Nevertheless, Venable had lefty Andrew Benintendi pitch hit for Grichuk against Cubs right-hander reliever Ryan Zephyrdjian, and was rewarded with a 2-run homer that temporarily put the Sox back up 5-4 before Nico Hoerner's RBI single in the ninth. For the Sox, this brand of mixing and matching has become an accepted norm. Quote, "We've got it pretty down now," Benintendi told the Sun-Times. "Watch the game, watch the situation, and whoever's in the pen throwing, if it's a big spot, he's going to come in for me or I'm going to come in for him," end quote. Now, you could argue, why is Will burning one of his best high leverage guys when it comes to basically bases being open by going with Brian Hudson as the opener last night, as it just completely unbalances the bullpen later? I mean, can't Tyler Schweitzer come back and try to get 3 outs, even though he threw 28 pitches the night before, if you want to have that lefty matchup against PCA? And turns out Hudson's opener didn't even matter, since he couldn't keep PCA from homering, and Michael Busch as well. Horse Stud had one job. Well, 2 jobs. He had 2 jobs, and he failed. First job, don't allow PCA to hit a home run. Second job, don't allow the Cubs to score in the first inning. Or obviously, here's a concept. Why not just start Erick Fedde? And if he gets down in a 2-0 hole in the first inning, oh well, fight back like this team has been known to do. Although, to be fair, hindsight is always 20/20. But I do have to wonder, what is the data probability spitting out to guide Will Venable? And I do think it's fair. After discussing in the first segment how this team is still behind in some areas, especially where data and analytics can help. Is it the same in the game prep information? Now, for those who are wanting Will to manage by gut, like Tony La Russa back in 83 or Ozzie Guillen in 2005, those days are long gone. Like it or not, front offices are in charge of everything because of the ability to provide staffs with information and to try to provide the best educated decisions. I mean, the goal should be, was good process used? And if it failed, it should fail only because of lack of execution, not stupidity. And although I'll say this, and I said it on yesterday's show, pitching to PCA, no matter what model you have, was stupid, because context should have screamed, this dude is playing at a different level. I mean, this dude is even playing better baseball than Shohei Ohtani, okay? And I've seen the comps of his MVP run being that, I mean, you got to go to another sport and look at like what Derrick Rose's MVP run with the Bulls was like. And the problem is the White Sox, they just don't have a figurative Chris Bosh or LeBron James to shut down PCA right now in big time moments. So you walk them like they did last night. Now, I'm still not throwing the fire Will camp, because, I mean, who's better out there right now in the market? I don't see anybody. And he deserves a ton of credit for the wins that this club has had, because it's based in part of great clubhouse chemistry. And if you go back to the shows that I did when he was hired, or the offseason shows where I laid out criteria to judge him, since I thought you can't judge him on wins and losses, that was a big chunk of the grading. However, I did list out, you got to be the control to the risk of the computer still providing information that doesn't back up the context you're seeing, what's in front of you. And he's not done that. So yeah, I'm disappointed in that. Well, MLB.com Scott Merkin posed an interesting question that inspired this week's Way Back Wednesday segment that I'll discuss next. A big thank you to our friends at Amazon for this limited break. This back-to-school season, spend less on your kids with Amazon. We all know how crazy the back-to-school shopping experience can be. It starts with a few items on the list, and then suddenly you're shopping for supplies and clothes and lunch gear and tech and about 10 other things you didn't see coming. It adds up fast. And when I look at my daughter's school supply list, I wonder if I'm shopping for one child or if I should just go out and purchase a small office supply store. I think I'm going to start investing in staples. I didn't realize third grade required this much inventory. And shopping like this can get out of control if you're not careful. And that's why my wife and I, we're always turning to Amazon for our back to school shopping needs. We basically turn to Amazon for a lot of our shopping needs because it helps us find a ton of deals and save some money to spend on things my daughter really wants us to spend on her, like her Christmas wish list. So remember, with Amazon's low back to school prices, just spend less on your kids because every dollar you don't spend on them is a dollar you haven't spent on them. And I know my daughter would much rather prefer I spend on her Christmas wish list. So shop back to school at Amazon and spend less on your kids. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. These walk-off losses have been tough. I mean, obviously, by the time I post this show, it's only going to be a few hours before today's game starts, and it would have been nice if today's game would have been a night game. I mean, the White Sox didn't need the getaway. Cubs don't need the getaway, but that's what the Cubs do. According to Sam Olber, co-host of Locked On Cubs, because I asked him, I'm like, is it because of the city ordinances? He's like, no, this is what they do on getaway days. So, okay. But, it's just, they got to win today. Hopefully, if you're listening to this later in the afternoon, hopefully they'll have won. They've got to win to at least maintain this comfortable lead because the Tigers, they're now down to 5 games over the Guardians, but here comes the Twins again. I mean, they built this comfortable lead. You want them to keep this comfortable lead. Anyways, shout out to MLB.com White Sox beat writer Scott Merkin for being the inspiration for this week's Way Back Wednesday segment when he posted this on Twitter. This is at Scott Merkin. We were talking about this topic at dinner. What's a specific year team that made you a fan of said baseball team? There are probably a number of young fans now supporting the White Sox from the excitement brought about by this 2026 squad. Although I would argue more that this season is bringing fans back who abandoned the team starting in 2022 and then fled the following 2 seasons, especially after the collapse of the previous rebuild in 2023 and then that historically awful season in 2024. Now, my answer, and this may reinforce me just being a White Sox sicko, as Beef Loaf from the 108 has described me. The year that made me a White Sox fan, 1989 to be exact. And that team lost 92 games, finished dead last. But that was my first season. My old man started taking me to White Sox games. And despite the club finishing dead last in the AL West and trading away Harold Baines mid-season, I grew to love the Pale Hose. Now, I'm sure some of you everydayers, it was a better club that made you a loyalist. I know some of you have put in the comments the 2005 team. That was obviously a fan clincher, especially for the younger generation. The definite surefire millennials, even the Gen Zs, like the kid memories, even like 2005 was probably like their 1989 season, except for way better. I know folks in the boomer generation have Dick Allen's teams or the Southside Hitman teams of the 70s. I'm sure the 83 team definitely made a lot of fans based on your generation. Maybe for the younger or for the older Gen Xers, that was your team. That was like, yeah, I'm a White Sox fan. And hey, I'm sure there are a few true millennials, not zennials or, borderline Gen X, borderline millennials like me. But the surefire millennials who were drawn to the White Sox because of Frank Thomas. But for me, it's Carlton Fisk, Ozzie Guillen, Ivan Calderon, Greg Hibbard, Bobby Thingpid that drew me to the White Sox. So, yeah, maybe I'm just a straight-up sicko. And maybe I was just a fan of Old Comiskey Park, even though the old girl was in her dying days. But for whatever reason, the moment I attended my first game, when the Sox played the Yankees in May, and it actually snowed that game, I've loved the White Sox. You know, I actually got to walk on the warning track on June 18th when the Sox took on the Red Sox, because it was Meet the Players Day. I mean, those were things that the White Sox did back in the day. They gave away bats the next year. And I remember, for some reason, I thought Steve Rosenberg would be a great pitcher. He was obviously not. And maybe that's because pretty much every game I went to that season, I believe I went to 4. I can definitely consciously recall I went to 3, but I think I went to 4. I keep forgetting that 4th game. I went to the Yankees game in May, Boston in June, and I was at the game August 19th when the team retired Harold Baines as number 3. And I believe my dad took me to one more. And that game sticks out for me. The Harold Baines retired number 3, not only because it was just such a surprise, but my oldest sister, Mary, she took me she took me. And she was 18 at the time, and I was 7. I mean, we had an age gap, but her and I both loved the White Sox. And her birthday was yesterday, and she would have been 55, but she lost her battle to cancer back in 2017. But one of the things that drew us to, that we could bond over, despite our age gap and despite our generation gap, basically, was the White Sox, was baseball. She did love baseball. And I was blessed that she took me, her little brother, who would just spout out White Sox players and stats, and she's probably like, whatever. She took her little brother to a White Sox game. And it turned out to be a very special day because they retired Harold Baines as number 3. And I remember that was one of my first favorite players. Now, obviously, 1990 was the way better season. That was probably the season that would have hooked some fans of my generation. But for me, Carlton Fisk and Ozzie Guillen in 1989 were larger than life. And Ivan Calderon, he only hit 14 home runs that year, but I always felt like I got to watch his at-bats. He might hit a home run. And I don't know why, but I was always drawn to the Bulldog Greg Hibbard when he got called up. Sammy Sosa even got some at-bats that season. And interesting thing about the 89 team, they actually scored more runs than the 1990 team that won over 90 games. And if they had a wild card, would have made the playoffs. Or if they were in the AL East, would have made the playoffs. The only reason why that 1990 team did not make the playoffs is because the Oakland A's, the defending champ, with that star-studded, roided-up lineup, was in the same division. And the difference between, obviously, a winning record and a losing record was the 89 team allowed 750 runs, while the 90 team allowed just 633 runs. Now, obviously, that 90 team had a full season of Hibbard, a rookie in Jack McDowell, who was starting to make his ascension into Cy Young, to eventually being a Cy Young pitcher. And Alex Fernandez also debuted. Plus, Eric King was a much better fourth starter than, say, Steve Rosenberg. Melito Perez, he was your innings eater for both years, obviously. But obviously, the 1990 season was so special, and I think that obviously made me a hardcore fan. And I'll just say this, going to Old Comiskey in 89 and watching Sox games on Sports Vision with my dad, I mean, that in 89, that's what turned me into a big-time White Sox fan. That is why I have such an affinity. I mean, the White Sox, again, that's kind of like my field of dreams, except for, obviously, I didn't score my dad for being a White Sox fan. But think about this, too. And, again, this may make me a sicko. But in 89, that's the year the Cubs went to the NLCS. And I grew up in the far northwest suburbs. I grew up in McHenry County. And my grandpa, who I was also very close to, loved the Cubs. He was a Sox fan for basically up until the White Sox went to cable. He believed television should be free, so he abandoned the Sox because he was so mad, and he became a Cubs fan. And that was a lot of things that we talked about. And I mean, think about it. Cubs had Andre Dawson, who I actually liked as a kid. I think every Chicagoan, Sox fan or Cubs fan, liked Andre Dawson, or they should have. They had Ryan Sandberg, Mark Grace, Greg Maddux, But I still willingly chose to embrace the White Sox, who finished 7th in the AL West. Now, I do agree great seasons or exciting seasons can be the draw, but heritage also plays a role. And that foundation of my loyalty was poured during a terrible 1989 season because of my old man taking me to Old Comiskey Park, buying me Scott Peterson dogs for $1.50 and Cokes in those commemorative glasses. That's what drew me to the White Sox. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. I'll be back tomorrow with the weekly Turned Out Differently Thursday segment. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever you get your audio podcast. As this show is available on places such as Apple or Spotify, you can email me with questions or comments to lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sox. You can follow me at Todd J. Dub. Also, the show's a TikTok page at Locked On White Sox. And thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB Game Night every game, every night until World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or listen to your podcast. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you later.